morning, everybody. So welcome to our session on open data infrastructures, the driver for innovation ecosystems at ESOF 2020. We're very happy to have you here this morning. For some of you, it might be very early in the morning. So for some of our panelists that we're going to meet a little bit later, we are very, very thankful that you stood up so early and have you here. Let me introduce you first so we have two moderators here today. So first of all, there is my very good colleague from Cambridge, who's currently sitting somewhere between London and Germany. I'm not entirely sure now. Katharina. Hi, Kathy.
Hello, everyone, and good morning. A very warm welcome from Germany. And yeah, I'm delighted to have the opportunity for this session today. And I hope we can bring you some exciting new information in our open data infrastructure session. Just a couple of words before Hannes kicks off the session. So as he already said, we are colleagues and have been for the last 3 years. We work together on a project investigating the impact of open data infrastructures. And Hannes is the brain for everything around business and entrepreneurship. Hannes is based at the Freie Universität in Berlin and is a professor for digital entrepreneurship. And he will make a start and tell us a little bit more about open data infrastructures, about innovation ecosystems. And yeah, Hannes, do you want to make a start?
Oh, yes, I would love to. So thanks again, Kathy. This is a very exciting session, I guess, because first of all, well, I'm from a business school, so I'm a business person, but we have founders in our session, we have investors, we are going to meet platform providers from open data platforms, and Kathy, who is from ELIXIR, very interesting institution that helps us standardize a couple of infrastructures and make sure that the data provided on these infrastructures is of high quality, which is pretty cool. So let's kick off a little bit with our session. So on our first slide, so Kathy, you have to switch the slides now. I'm so sorry. So we're going to talk a little bit about innovation and entrepreneurship today. And if I talk about entrepreneurship today, we are going to figure out the kind of interrelationship between entrepreneurship, so the thing that keeps our economy growing and economy moving forward, and our technologies, so the infrastructures that we provide. And many of the entrepreneurs that we keep our hats right now are using a lot of technologies. So we call them digital entrepreneurs. So they use digital artifacts, platforms, and infrastructures, and they use them in kind of novel ways. This doesn't necessarily mean that this has to be like a technological new revolutionary thing, but sometimes it's just using the technologies that are out there to provide new solutions to exist in real world problems. So for instance, if you want to have a new appointment with a doctor, well, regularly you would just call someone, but there might be a very interesting app out there that just uses a couple of existing technologies to bring this kind of appointment meeting online. Maybe not a radical thing, but it is a very helpful thing that helps your healthcare provider, for instance. So today we're going to talk a little about these technologies, and let me kick off this with looking at these kind of infrastructures, starting with one of the infrastructures that probably all of you, even if you don't have a healthcare background, probably know, which is the internet. So, Kathy, could you go to the next slide, please? So the internet is not that very new. I mean, many students that I have think they kind of grew up in the 90s or something, but the early internet is really something that has developed from the late 60s until today. And if you look at the very early steps of the internet, that were scientists. It was originated in science with a science purpose. So if you look at this kind of map of the internet, which I found always kind of funny because that's the internet, there was a moment in time where we could actually map the internet. So, and if you look at this, you see that those are all connections between different universities. So it was researchers and scientists being interested in communicating with other researchers and scientists to exchange their data and exchange their insights, predominantly first on files and on kind of data files. And this is why at the very beginning of the internet, everything was really about, okay, how do we make these technical connections? Then how do we exchange files? So if you're a little bit from a computer science background, you may know the file transfer protocol, FTP. This is really about sharing files. And you see, by the evolvement of the internet, by evolvement of this very important infrastructure that is originally in science, you see the kind of how it was used if you look at the kind of standards. So TCP/IP helped us connect different people from all across the globe. SMTP, POP, or IMAP are maybe some standards that you might come across when you start registering your email or providing your email information in your mobile application. So suddenly in the 80s, it was all about exchanging messages because that was what the internet was used to. So, and if we go to the next slide, you really see at the very beginning, we had these 2 users and 15 users. But when the 90s appears, suddenly this internet goes boom. And now we have there is an interesting map that you can also find kind of online. This is how the map looked like in the 90s. This is nothing that you can comprehend as a human being. It's not even easily comprehensible by a machine right now. So it is an infrastructure that is very, very complex. And why did this come? Because another building block was created in the 90s, which many of us take pretty much for granted right now, which is the World Wide Web. What we think that the internet really is, or many people think that the internet really is. And this is a kind of standard, the hypertext markup language. And this became the building material. And this is one reason why I want to talk about this today. Because it was established in science, it came from CERN, so it was provided by presumably Tim Berners-Lee at the first, and it was a building material that enabled a lot of people to do very interesting new things. So 15-year-old me, back in the 90s, was suddenly able, even though I was not educated at all in computer science, but I was suddenly able to create a web page on a kind of professional basis and be better at that than many of my much older peers. And this is interesting. I mean, how come that we create a solution, that we create a technology that enables so stupid little me to create such a thing? So and then there were tons of people in the 90s. So we had a lot of different web pages coming up for different firms, for different purposes, and a lot of different niches were explored in the 90s. And everything was enabled by these infrastructures, by the internet and the standards that were put upon the internet. And if we look at all these different standards, they were all driven by the way the internet was used. So suddenly SSL came up, TLS came up. So everything was about privacy. How do we make sure that all our communication is safe and so on and so forth? And if we look how the internet was used then, so it was become more and more complex. And suddenly many of these niches that were maybe filled out by a couple of nerds or a couple of individuals were suddenly professionalized. So search engines came up because someone had to make sense of this whole complexity. And when we move forward and make a little bit of a fast forward to kind of today in the 2000s on the next slide, is that we could figure out this professionalization became even more straightforward. So the kind of landscape that you might have seen become much more urbanized, as I would say. So we have today, we have a lot of digital platforms that by themselves create another top layer on these infrastructures with their own kind of standards and their own kind of walled gardens. And I'm pretty much sure that every one of you came upon all these different platforms such as iOS App Store, Play Store by Google, or other platforms such as Facebook. And there are many, many, many more. So, and those are provided by private institutions, and everything was established on open standards and open infrastructures. And even though many of these businesses, many of these proprietary standards are held by private companies, the internet is still a very interesting infrastructure because everybody still keeps together and still keeps to think about how we can harmonize what we are doing there, for instance, in the W3C. So why am I going to tell you this? Because I want to make sure that if you go out here, I would want you to know open data infrastructures and open infrastructures from science do not only enable science. This is what we oftentimes tell people, but they enable entrepreneurs. They are the building blocks. They give us the tools. They give us the things that we can do to really start out and start companies. Many of those things we would not be able if we would do them themselves. So today we're going to focus on the healthcare industry in particular. And if we go on the next slide, you would see that there is a lot of things going up. So I'm here borrowing some of the slides from Jessica, so I hope you excuse myself if I do this, but I pretty much like exponential graphs, of course, because I'm kind of from entrepreneurship, and we like hockey graphs, so or hockey sticks. So you see, what you see here is the kind of exponential growth of biodata, of genome data. So in the last years, so I'm pretty sure Jessica can tell us much more about this, much better than I could, but genome data has an exponential growth in the last years, and it's not only used in particularly scientific regards, but very, very much also in business regards. And this is what today's session is going to be all about. So if we go to the next slide, you will see that there are a lot of different repositories that we have today. So there are a lot of different infrastructures. Some of them have regard, for instance, of the transcriptome or the proteins. Some of them have relationship between diseases, or give us information on phenotypes, or even one of the maybe most known infrastructures are about publications and people, such as PubMed. And what we did is we asked a lot of different entrepreneurs all across Europe, how did you actually use these different infrastructures? And what we figured out, and that was quite astonishing to us, is that it's not only that they use singular infrastructure. So it's not only, okay, we definitely rely on PubMed because this is where we find our most interesting relationships between, for instance, some kind of a genetic association to particular disease published in a publication. But what we figured out is most of the startups actually use a ton of different repositories and connect them. And this is where the real insights and the business value lies for them. And that was really, really eye-opening for us. So today we have a landscape of different entrepreneurial actors on the European landscape on the next slide. So what you see here is, and can you turn on all the bullet points? Yeah, thank you. So we have a lot of different biodata companies all across Europe here, particularly in Western Europe, which is very interesting. And there is a high relationship between the innovation ecosystems that you find. So we have a couple of ecosystems that are very, very entrepreneurial per se. We have a lot of coincidentally, we have some of these ecosystems being also very, very active in the scientific field, Cambridge being one of them. I think this is also one reason why we have so many people from Cambridge today in the panel. So there are a lot of very, very good scientific actors in the Cambridge area. At the same time, there are a lot of unicorns from other sectors also in the Cambridge area. So there is a lot of entrepreneurial activity as well. And when you look at what people do with genome data, is some of the things are pretty astonishing and fabulous. So we have companies that think about healthy living, think about, okay, how can we use your information from your genome, for instance, to give you some kind of an insight into how you become a fitter person or more healthy person, how you can go against some of your diseases or some of your diseases, how you can go into diagnostics. So some of this data is really used for core healthcare provision, therapeutics, and diagnostics, while some of the others move into very, very interesting other fields, such as if you look at Ancestry.com or if you look at MyHeritage, some of this genome information is actually used to look into your family history. While we have also some kind of interesting other cases that are fairly questionable, such as DNA romance, where you look for your perfect partner using DNA, using your genome information. I think this is an example that I borrowed from Jason, by the way. And then we have, and this is also something that we really have to think about if we think about the breadth of how this data is used. There is even some use of this is fairly unethical, but not fairly regulated. So, and there is this very famous example of 122 Shades of Grey, an app that promised to figure out whether someone is gay based on their genome profile, which is completely nonsense, so completely bollocks, so there is no science behind that. But it's an app that was actually provided. And so we see there is a breadth of different things, and we definitely have to look at what's happening there, because it's interesting, but it's also maybe some of them are maybe even dangerous. So I would like to wrap this a little bit up. I just want to kick off a little bit and like show you a little bit of the picture. So if we go to the next slide, what we did in the last years is really look into what are these companies doing, and what we figured out is, so a lot of this data has been so far used particularly for scientists and in science purposes. The problem, or the good thing about scientists is scientists are fairly creative. The bad thing about science is regularly it's very, very project related. So everybody thinks very much about their own position, very much about their own projects, thinks about, okay, what's the next big thing that I get published? And so there was very much a lack of professionalization when it comes to handling this kind of data. And what we see now is that much of this professionalization is happening by businesses, many of those being entrepreneurs and small, medium-sized companies, at least for now. So they look into, okay, what data do we have there? How can we select this data? How can we integrate? So if the entire life cycle of this data is now professionalized. And this is what these companies are doing. Some of them only parts of that, some of them and the entire life cycle. And this is what me as a business researcher then finds very, very intriguing and very, very exciting. So again, so this should give you a little bit of an overview of some of the topics that we might come across today. I would very much like to hand over to Kathy, who would give you a little bit more of an insight into, okay, what are these biodata infrastructures actually doing? And I think she is the perfect person to give you a quick overview there. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much, Hannes, for this introduction. And so from my side, I want to give you a little bit deeper understanding of a research infrastructure, what it actually is and what it actually provides, and how entrepreneurs and researchers can leverage what is provided by an infrastructure. So the title of my presentation is How Research Infrastructure Support Innovation in the Life Sciences. And first, I think I need to explain what exactly a life science research infrastructure actually is. And as you can see from this definition, these are organizations that provide resources or services, either to academic communities, but this can also be industry or just the wider public. And they can make use of those services and resources and develop services on top, or innovate by using the data, for example. Okay, so then the next question is, what kind of services are provided by those life science research infrastructures? So this can also be very, very diverse and range from, for example, scientific equipment and instrumentation. This can be, for example, a huge microscope, computing in cloud systems. These are huge databases and data repositories, but also software and analysis tools, and also expertise in many associated domains, such as policy, legal aspects, etc. So, life science research infrastructures can either be single-sited or distributed, and I explain what that means. So a single-sited research infrastructure, and you all probably know that, is, for example, CERN. So this means they have a central facility in one geographical location. And In addition, we have something called distributed infrastructures. These distributed infrastructures can also have facilities, but they also operate in the virtual space. So, for example, a database. And ELIXIR, for example, is such a distributed infrastructure. And that means that services that are provided through ELIXIR are distributed across all our different member states. And what ELIXIR does is try to bring all those services and all those facilities together under one umbrella, so they operate in a coordinated manner. And the level of wasting of resources is kept very low. Okay, so I've already kind of touched on that. ELIXIR is an umbrella organization of hundreds of institutes. And at the moment, we have 23 members. This is 22 member states and the European Bioinformatics Institute. They are all coordinated by a central hub. And our offices are actually based in the European Bioinformatics Institute. And from there, we try to coordinate all the other resources. So the kind of services that are provided are in the areas of, as I already said, databases, software tools. There is a lot of training going on. Hannes has already mentioned that we're really driving standard adoption. We provide compute resources, but also data management support. And all those services are kind of based in the life science or bioinformatics sector. So ELIXIR is also known as the Bioinformatics Infrastructure. Just so we're all on the same page about bioinformatics, bioinformatics is kind of a marriage between biology and IT, and is really concerned with making sense of life science data. And this can be literally anything from plant sciences to marine sciences. And as Hannes has already mentioned, a huge bit is concerned with human genomics. And particularly in the last couple of months, we have seen that infectious disease is also a very hot topic. So just to give you a specific example, since March, we have been collaborating with the European Commission and with the European Bioinformatics Institute on the COVID-19 data portal. The COVID-19 data portal is a one-stop shop that as a platform for sustainable sharing of data for COVID-19 data and associated and related data. And people can really integrate and link services and expose them on this platform. And we have seen huge traction and usage already. So if you're interested in more details about what is provided there, just have a look and type COVID-19 data portal into your search engine, and I'm sure you will find it. Okay. So now I want to make the bridge to why we are talking about innovation and industry. So how does a research infrastructure actually support innovation and industry? And we based it around several pillars. So we try to reach out and engage with industry. We try to have collaborative projects. We have an industry advisory board. And we provide services. And then, of course, we also do research into how our resources are used, such as the collaboration with Hannes. And to give you some specific examples of how we do that, for example, every year we run a hackathon where people from industry or from academia can submit projects. And once these projects are evaluated and accepted, we have a week-long hackathon that is open to everyone, where people can get together and really have the opportunity to exchange knowledge and work on collaborative projects. And we've seen that proximity really helps to establish good relations between research groups, between industry and academics. And we've seen a lot of good and exciting entrepreneurial ideas coming out of this week. what we also do is, for example, we host events that are based more around networking and particularly for smaller companies, having a platform to show new innovative ideas. These are events such as our ELIXIR Bioinformatics Industry Forum. So this year, of course, we couldn't bring people around the table, so we've moved to the virtual space, and we've run a series of webinars that are focused around commercialization of how to establish companies based on open data, etc., etc. So the next one is on the 29th of October, and if you want to see how we really try to bring the bioinformatics industry together around the table and discuss certain topics, then join us there. So just to round that up, Hannes has already elaborated how companies use open resources and really build a business on top. So about 2 years ago now, we've started this project and published a small report that showcased 7 companies, and you can see the logos of those companies on this slide, that really started off their business by building on openly available data resources. And they all declared that without those open resources, they would have not been able to spin out the company in the form they did. And this was, of course, something extremely exciting and interesting for us, because this was something we had never really considered before. So with open research data, you always think about other researchers and academics making use of that. But the bridge to the private sector wasn't actually something a lot of people talked about. So in the last 2 years, we dug a little bit deeper into that ecosystem and exposed a lot more of those companies and how they operate. And yeah, that brings me to my last slide. I hope you have now a good understanding of what this session will be about and the necessary background knowledge to follow and ask questions. And if you're interested in finding out more about our work, then you can join, for example, the industry newsletter. Right, I'll hand over to Hannes again now, who will help introduce our panelists and moderate the panel session. So thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. So as promised before, it should not be us talking to you. Actually, it would be much better to have experts from the field talking about the topic that we have at hand. And we are very fortunate because we have a couple of experts here. And I would like to give those the opportunity to first introduce themselves, and afterwards we are going to figure out a couple of those questions that we have on our hands. The first one is Jessica, and I'm very happy that Jessica is here because she stands for one of these very important biodata platforms, and she is now head of strategy. So very welcome, Jessica. So maybe you can say some words about you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Hannes. So I'm Jessica, and I'm from the European Bioinformatics Institute. The EBI, as it's commonly known, is one of the largest open data infrastructures actually in the world, but we work collaboratively with other similar institutes in the US and in Japan to provide open data. And what we do is we take research data that's been published and deposited into our databases and then make them openly available for people to use. We have about over 40 different databases at the moment that provide different kinds of biodata, from genomics to proteins to pathways to human genome information as well. And just to give you an idea of the scale and how much usage there is, on an average day, there's about 63 million web hits across all of our databases. Which is a large number, and just shows you how important these infrastructures are for life science research.
Wow, so this is that's an impressive number, hardly imaginable. Thank you, Jessica. So we will hear a lot more from you during our conversation. Let's go quickly to the next person. So I'm very happy also to have Jason here. Jason has multiple roles here because he has been an entrepreneur and is now also running an incubator and is an investor. So, hey, Jason.
Hi, Hannes and everyone. Thank you again for inviting me to join this panel. It's really exciting. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. My previous company, Cambridge Epigenetics, we were developing biomarker signatures for the early detection of cancer. And obviously there was a huge AI and machine learning component there. Now I am running an incubator and have raised a fund called Start Codon, based in Cambridge. And our goal is to find the most promising, high potential healthcare focused companies from anywhere in the world, help them set up shop in Cambridge and leverage all of the resources we have in the ecosystem here to drive their success and help them secure additional funding. We offer £250,000 of investment in each company, and starting with a 6-month program with us, continuing with additional support, guidance and mentorship to help those companies secure their seed rounds and Series A. Importantly, it comes down to the partners that we have at the table. So we were co-founded by Cambridge Innovation Capital, which is the VC arm of the University of Cambridge, as well as BBT, which runs the Babraham Research Campus near Cambridge. Also, Jonathan Milner, who's a serial entrepreneur and co-founded an antibody company, Abcam, and Roche and Genentech as our first pharma partner. We have a much broader range of partners than that, which I can always reference later. But if anybody is listening and interested in getting a bit more support, a bit of guidance, maybe even moving to Cambridge, I would be more than happy to tell them more.
Thanks, Jason. So as you hear, there are a lot of different people involved in getting innovation done. And I think this is also a topic that we're going to talk about. So the next person that we have here today is an entrepreneur, a very successful entrepreneur, a very interesting startup called LifeBit, just raised a larger amount of funding as well. So happy to have you here, Maria.
Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here. So I'm CEO and co-founder of LifeBit, as was just already mentioned. So on my side, LifeBit has been a very fast growing company. We actually are started in Cambridge, moved to London, and we're still in London, growing fast. A lot of what we do, obviously we do quite a lot of deep tech. We have a platform that basically does several things, among which it provides access and analysis to big cohorts of population level genomics and biomedical data. That's one big side of it. And on the other side of it, we do have quite a lot of advanced AI-based technology that facilitates target drug discovery, basically, and target discovery and target validation. And a lot of that, especially on the AI side, of course, it is based on a lot of open source data that we, again, as we were shown in the slides before, we scrape through the internet, we analyze in unique ways, and then we deploy a lot of AI technology around it, and then we build different models that can predict different valuable things around drug discovery. So yeah, that's LifeBit in a nutshell.
Thanks, Maria. And finally, there is Abel, who calls himself now, rightfully so, a serial entrepreneur, and he's also an investment director. He has just left one company, and maybe he can tell a little bit about his role right now.
Right, yeah, thank you for inviting me as well. Very exciting to be in this panel. Yes, I'm based in Cambridge in the UK, and I'm a serial entrepreneur now because I started my second company just kind of a couple of months ago as a co-founder. That's Sophie. But before I get into that, so my first company was Eagle Genomics, been mentioned before, and the company is still going. I exited about 5 months ago in April. And just after exiting, I kind of joined the investment side of things, so CMS Ventures. CMS is the investment arm of China Medical Systems, a Chinese pharma company based in Hong Kong that is basically extending its wings in the UK and wants to invest in UK life sciences and specifically in 4 areas: drug discovery, diagnostic, and digital. So it's pretty large. Okay. So I'm bringing to that kind of investment a bit like in Jason in Startcode and being in the entrepreneur side, in the one who are trying to make the most of the money that investors give us, and now being on the side who's giving the money. So I think I'm bringing a bit of empathy when I'm listening to entrepreneurs pitching in that side of things. Just to come back to open data, Eagle Genomics is developing, an enterprise data platform and knowledge management platform, and for that you need open data, because the deployment you do into customers is basically to compare their private generated data and compare that with the baseline that is basically in the open domain. And so if you don't have open data, I think Eagle Genomics, hardly would exist, and many other companies wouldn't exist if there was no open data. And to finish with Sophie, Sophie is again another data play, but in the field of managing chronic conditions that don't have any kind of medicines or drugs in the market, around kind of chronic pain, around insomnia, around anxiety, and a lot of people are turning to plant-based medicines with very few kind of evidence that those kind of extract they're buying from shops like Holland & Barrett or Boots here in the UK have any effect on them. So we are going to be developing a platform to help measure the potential effect or non-effect of those kind of alternative medicines. And there is a play into clinical trials in pharma later on if that works.
Thanks, Abel. Actually, I would like to, so my first question really goes into one direction, that you just laid your thumb like directly into the wound. You said that without open data, Eagle Genomics would have not existed. So what's the role of open data at the very beginning of this kind of innovation entrepreneurial activity? Let's start with Abel, maybe, because you said so.
Right.
Why would you say so?
Well, because I mean, in science, when you want to make new discoveries or have new insights, the first thing you do is you look at what's out there, what's the state of the art. And until the rise of cloud, big data infrastructures, that was in the head of the scientist, right? The one who has the brain to read all the papers and from their colleagues around the world, they are building their baseline knowledge in their head, right? But we're at the stage now where that level of knowledge to be absorbed is beyond brain kind of consumption, I would say. And you need to have that baseline somewhere. Okay, you cannot start a research with no baseline. It's very hard, or you have to build something. And if there is obviously kind of research out there and data, it would be stupid for any company doing life sciences R&D to start from nothing and not take what's been out there. And you need to have a way to kind of make that scale and capture as much of data and insight and knowledge that's out there, to avoid basically repeating what people have been doing, to avoid wasting money where something has been discovered already, and to kind of target your resources to do things that are truly innovative. And if you don't do that, then you waste time and you waste money. And in a very competitive arena, that's quite important to make sure every pound spent counts.
So yeah, time and money is obviously what entrepreneurs lack all the time.
Yeah.
So Maria, so would you agree with that? So would you say also without open data, your company would have not existed? Has it played the same role for you?
So partially, definitely life would have existed, because what we build is as I said, core deep tech technology that actually helps our clients deal with massive volumes of data and data that are basically very, very diverse, and they need to be brought together. But definitely parts of our technology wouldn't exist without open data. That's for sure. And parts of our technology wouldn't be as effective. And to make this more concrete, so one of the big value propositions that we give to our clients, especially in the population genomic space, is we give cohort browsing capabilities, where basically you bring genomics data combined with clinical and other phenotypic data for hundreds of thousands, even millions sometimes of patients, right? And then you ingest all of this data and you integrate them into basically a cohort browser capability, where we can very easily now query this data and identify a cohort on the basis of phenotypic and genetic characteristics. And even if I take as an example, the genetic characteristics, normally the queries that you run would be like women over 40 with COVID status positive that have certain pre-existing condition, and they have in certain chromosome, for example, or genes, certain mutations that are, that are benign, or that are, that they seem to be having some effect, or that they are involved in certain pathways, or that have certain allele frequencies, and so on and so forth, right? Now, all of that information about how you are annotating all of this genetic information comes from, as was shown before, from hundreds of open databases and repositories out there, like CleanVar information and PubMed information, and then so much more cosmic information, and so much more information that's openly available on the public sector. So as you can understand, if all of that wasn't there, then it wouldn't be as easy for us to bring all of that information and then help our users be able to run such advanced queries against large cohorts of individuals, right? That's one excellent example. Another excellent example, I would say, is, as I said, a lot around our AI technology, where we've trained several models on millions of gene expression data on that have been, and it's all data coming basically on how, when you screen different drugs to different cell lines, or when you publish different experiments and data from experiments that have done for vaccines development, for other types of drug development, then again, this is all of this data that we are taking and we are processing in very unique ways. And then we are deploying our AI technology. So a lot of this part also wouldn't have been there without open data. And those are just two very high level examples about specifically what's the technological value proposition that we are offering to our clients that wouldn't exist, or it wouldn't be as great as it is without having the vast ecosystem of open data out there that we do have today.
I mean, that's interesting. So we have, on the one hand, open data seems to enable one companies to exist in the first place, and then the others are like your kind of functions that you provide are much better because you have this kind of data rightly available. Is there
exactly?
I mean, for Jason, you really have the overview, I guess, because I mean, you have been an entrepreneur, but I guess in the last year or so with Start Codon, you have been, I guess, only what you've been doing is like screening the entire market, right? You've seen all of them now, I guess, or at least most of them, to see who can join you. So what's your kind of experience? How did they start their companies? How did they start training their models? Is open data important, or can startups maybe even collect their own data?
I think it has to be a combination of both. Just echoing what Abel and Maria said, the companies that we look at that are very heavily focused on information, we always like to understand that do they have access to a proprietary data set, or at least some proprietary insight into data sets that are publicly available. So it's a combination of, with their limited resources, mostly from an academic setting, having the funding to run the experiments or the collaborative partners to provide the data that they then use as the building blocks of their platform. What's interesting is at StoryCon, we're interested in broadly therapeutics, diagnostics, medtech, and digital health, but we tell everybody they must have an informatics strategy. It's no longer the days that, are you an informatics company or are you other? Doesn't matter what we're looking at. Every company is touched upon by data, both their own private sets and open data. But I also have to emphasize that we ask not only for their informatics strategy, but also for the quality of the data that they're using, as opposed to just the quantity. And I'm finding that oftentimes a lot of the publicly available data, just like many of the publications that are out there, regardless of the impact factor of the journal they're in, aren't necessarily reproducible. So we have to be very clear that as we look at the open data and its importance, we also have to be emphasizing the quality of the data that's being utilized. Otherwise, we'll end up down a rabbit's hole and going in the wrong direction. That's one of the things that we've seen often as well, is that you make insights and discoveries from publicly available data sets, which is fantastic, but it turns out that they weren't produced with the right controls, that there wasn't a quality management system in place when the experiments were run, or maybe the data sets are themselves incomplete and not properly annotated. So I would always advocate that it's essential for the healthcare companies of the present and the future to have access to those open data sets and infrastructures, but we all have to emphasize and ensure that they're high quality as well.
That's a fascinating point. I mean, like basically all the entrepreneurs that I talk to in the biotech field, they all talk about data quality at some point or another. So data quality seems to be very, very important there. So let's play this ball to Jessica, who is at the EBI providing this kind of data. So I know that you have an industry background, so you've seen both sides, I guess. What's the issues there? So why can't EBI provide the data and the quality that pharma maybe needs it?
So that's a really good question. So the remit of EBI is actually to host all of the data that researchers around the world deposit into their databases, and regardless of how it's been generated or what paper it's been published, or as Jason said, what impact factor that paper had. There is, especially now, a push to make all research data publicly available. So we have to provide the databases to do that. But we actually have two different types of databases. There are archives that are sort of great big collections of deposited data. So if you want to look at everything, like say want to look at every single sequence of a virus that's been deposited in there, that's available. But then we also have knowledge bases that take the data from archives and curate them and annotate them and overlay a lot of specialist information on them. And we have there's still a lot of manual curation that goes on for data. We have hundreds of people looking at journals and trying to map information together. And it's one of those things where you're trying to keep, there's data coming in every day, and then you're trying to keep on top of it by curating it and trying to serve the scientific community in the best way possible. And different communities have different needs, So if you're, for imaging data, for example, the plant phenotype people might be looking at it from a different angle to medical imaging specialists. So how do you cater for the different communities out there? And sometimes you do have specialist resources being created, say for drug discovery or for other specialist applications, or then you have other companies that go and do that as well. There's so much. There is just so much that you can do, trying to stay on top of the volume of data, but then also to provide data that enables different communities to answer the questions that they want. And I think that leads us quite nicely to, maybe to standards, because standardization across communities goes a long way. It's a really it's a challenging task to define standards and to find standards that are agreed on by communities. But once they are there and then people start using them, then it really helps towards increasing the quality of the data that people can access as well.
All right, so completely right. So standards are would be a good helpful thing to create this kind of baseline that Abel said that if I paraphrase him, it's like the startups they or at least Eagle provide this kind of baseline knowledge base, and to redo their standards might be a good way. Is that so, Abel?
Can you repeat the question?
So is it really the case that if we had these kind of standards that might be that might be a better starting point for an entrepreneur to launch a startup because then you have the knowledge base rightly available?
So well, there's different kind of standards, and if we're talking about standards of data format or data quality measures, yes, okay. But I think, in my view, after 12 years at Eagle, I think it's an utopia to believe that we will have all the open data in the world in all the great centers that are going to be around the world, because EBI is one out of many, that all of them will follow the kind of whatever standard is going to be there for making the data high quality and digestible kind of straight away. I think this is the holy grail that everybody's trying to kind of chase. I think what's going to be important for startups, but it's not only for startups, it's for also big established life sciences companies, is how they can onboard the data that's in the open domain in the most efficient way for their specific use cases. And that is going to be also part of the competitive advantage of either the internal software or data scientists or the startups or companies they are buying products from, be it Eagle, be it LifeBit, so that they are onboarding only the data that is not only of quality, as kind of Jason mentioned, but more importantly, data that is of value. There is a lot of basic companies that are onboarding data just because the competitor onboarded the data and don't ask themselves, is this data of value to what I'm doing? So I think beyond quality, I think there's another level, and that's kind of something we've been pushing at Eagle, is how do you measure the value of the data you are kind of either producing or onboarding from external parties? Within value, can you hear me? I think the screen went off. Yeah. I mean, within value, one component is quality, obviously, but there's also relevance, there's utility, there is accessibility. And I think in this kind of data intense R&D world, the companies are going to be able to focus their energy to onboard the right relevant data at the right time in a way that is usable for the people internally for different use cases, are going to be the one that's going to win, basically. So coming back to your initial question for startups, building on standards, yes, because you have them get into the ecosystem, but they have to build something that is kind of differentiated on top of that standard, be it the implementation or the user experience around it. And the example I can give, there's a company that's doing all kind of as a software for the accounting. It's called Sage here in the UK. I think they're quite global now. And one of the things they do is they have a software to do management of all the accounting kind of compliance in the UK for companies. And that's published by government. And what they do is they make sure that their software is up to date with the latest standards published by the government, at the minute. Okay. And a startup, if they follow a standard, they have to make sure that they are following that when the standard evolves. And ideally, they are contributors to that standard to make it evolve and progress so they become the thought leader in that standard. It becomes kind of the basis for all the companies. So yes, standards are important. The thing is, and I finish with that, you cannot kind of impose standards from the top down unless you're government. Is basically imposition by use. Okay. And that's the kind of the trick here. There's many standards around. Which one is going to be the one that wins for a specific use case or utility? It depends on what the outcome of the value of that standard is for the many users that will use it, basically.
I mean, there you raise an important point, maybe, or pretty sure. As an entrepreneur, you would look for opportunities. So you would look for use cases. So Maria, you mentioned use cases in your last comment at several times. So you know what a customer wants, and you know where to get this data. So is not having standards, so I like twist the question, is not having standards actually maybe a good thing for you, because you know where the data is that the client needs, and the client does not know how to get to this data easily because there are no standards. Is there an opportunity for you?
So that's a great question. I don't know if there is necessarily an opportunity. I cannot necessarily judge that. Definitely, not having standards or having too many standards, which is also like a great phenomenon of our age, I would say. And it's definitely what makes it very difficult for also our clients to do certain things. But what we mainly see is that what brings the biggest opportunity and value is that the data that are fundamentally out there are in different types and different formats. And as Abel was alluding to, it just completely, even if we had standards, it would have been completely an utopia thinking that we're not going to be having all of these different types and forms of data, because those are not these data are a result of the ever-evolving technology, right? We had microarrays, now we have, eventually, what became cheaper to have was exome sequencing. So now, especially if I look at gene expression, for example, data, right, which is one of the core data that we look when we look at drug discovery, right? So we used to measure gene expression with microarrays, and still people use a lot of microarrays, even within pharma, simply because it's cheap, right? And it's very easy to do, right? So easy and cheap. Then, it started becoming more and more affordable and also easier to get, exome sequencing, right? And then that started, and now we have quite a lot of RNA-seq data because of that. And now it's becoming more affordable as we're moving from not just gene expression, but overall, whole genome, to look more at whole genome sequencing. And then even before whole exome sequencing, we have gene panels and so on and so forth, right? So it is a lot of things that, it is this ever-evolving technology that actually creates quite a lot of opportunity. And the biggest thing that we do, at least when we take data, both within clients' organization, but also on open data, is how now do you deal with all of this data? And one dimension is that. The other dimension is, again, taken as an example, gene expression, but then I think you can extrapolate from there. Is when we measure gene expression, we measure it because you are screening a drug over different cell lines, for example, right? And then, or you're administering a drug to a person or an animal model. And in that case, you have different protocols for administering the drugs. And then as such, you can administer the drug in 6-hour cycles, 12-hour cycles, 18-hour cycles, whatever it is. And then basically at that point, not only you now end up having what is effectively measuring gene expression at different data formats, but you also have it measuring sort of at completely different dosages of a drug, different sort of time points, and so on and so forth. So then the big question it comes, and that's where LifeBit adds more value, is how do you now standardize all of this data in a way that you can actually train AI models without introducing all of the confounding factors that, as you can understand, are being introduced by the different data data formats, different time points, even different, basically, time it takes to biological responses different dosages and different times, that the drug has been saying there, right? So I wouldn't say that even if we had let's say everything was RNA-seq, so then we had one component off, we would still, not have a lot of biology that will still create a lot of opportunities for us. And again, I'm taking gene expression as an example, but you can very easily extrapolate from there for a lot of other things that you can doing around if you are looking at metabolomics or metagenomics, or if you're looking even at whole genome sequencing, where now you are at population level genomics, and then you need to do rare diseases, and then you need to be bringing together so many different annotations, clinical phenotypes, so on and so forth, right? So as you can understand, there is quite a lot of exponential complexity to the matter.
So actually, we need we need to link the data and have the features and metadata ready, always dependent to the use case. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So,
yes, I'm saying that what would help is definitely better standards. No one can argue against that. More reproducibility. So at least when something is reported as a finding, it's a real finding, right? We have been having God knows how many months lost on trying to reproduce data from the Broad Institute that they were reported in high impact papers, and no one in the world could reproduce that, just like no one. And the papers around those data were not just retracted, would have normally been retracted, and they weren't because it was Broad and very famous people authoring those, right? But that's a different story. But it took us, in order to reproduce those papers, to actually get down to the friend of the friend of the friend that actually did the experiments and could give us all of the teeny details about how a lot of these things were run that obviously were not mentioned in any of the papers, right? And we're like, oh, now we know how to actually, reanalyze this data, recalibrate, what happened, why these numbers look like they look, and so on and so forth, right? And as you can understand, that's not scalable, neither from investors that are trying to evaluate, these startups are using this data, because if you're looking from a high level perspective, it's just oh, you're using best quality data on planet Earth, Broad, highly cited, high impact Nature papers, all of that, right? You're ticking all of the boxes, then it's crap, right? And also from a startup perspective, Lightbit happens to be, a very well-funded company, and apart from a very well-funded company, a company that is making quite substantial revenues from all of the clients that we have. So yeah, we can afford to lose 6 months having one or two people, just really drilling down on this data, because are fundamentally quite valuable. So we are committed to making it work. But if you think about what that does to other companies, it can just be the difference, especially in the beginning, right? Companies have normally, as they are starting, they have 3 to maybe 6 months of lifespan, right? You cannot be losing that into trying to figure out what's happening with this data and how to reproduce them. So definitely better standards, more reproducibility, more reliability on what is said to be, right? And especially from big institutes, being EBI, being the Broad, being whoever else, big journals, Nature, Science, if you're publishing something, please make sure that that's reproducible, right? Even on the data side. So that reliability, I would say, is even more important than reproducibility, that we know at least, right? That what we are looking there, it is reliable. Definitely those things could help. Another thing that could help is standards. No, I wouldn't say just standards, but best practices, especially from EBIs or the Broad, when they are asking people, or even asking people, when they do submit data, when they publish data, to do it in a structured manner, right? It's really great to have archives, but having archives is saying here's a black hole, or a vast sea. Good luck with that. It's just completely unusable. It's not searchable. It's not queryable. And I understand Jessica's point that if you want things more structured into databases, there are hundreds of people that do manual annotations to that. But maybe we need to start thinking about decentralized models. At the end of the day, scientists are using our money, right? So public money to fund the research. For sure, they can start following some of the best practices that EBI established with all of their annotators on how to annotate data. And then the scientists, publishing this data and depositing this data could do those annotations, right? Like it's not that difficult. They know the data inside out, right? And at the end of the day, they are paid for that, right? So I don't know, but that would be my biggest, if I had a Santa wish list, as I like to say and normally ask my clients as well, my Santa wish list would be like, can we have a decentralized model where every researcher under the sun is responsible for the data? They do annotations, they structure the data, and they deposit the data in databases that are, you know, managed by EBI, by other great ELIXIR, by other great institutes or organizations, right? In a structured manner. I think that could help us really allow everyone in this industry, right?
That is an interesting point, and I'd like to give this right to Jessica because she's here, and you've done industry relations before, so I'm pretty sure that you had some of those.
Sorry for putting you on the spotlight, Jessica.
I think this is something Kathy can also chime in as well, because it is something that's ongoing, trying to engage the community, the scientific community, to curate data. I mean, trying to get people to curate their data or annotate their data before submission is something that they are meant to do. But a lot of people, when they're submitting, all they want to do is deposit their data, get an accession ID, and I don't know if when you're in that publishing stage, it's very tense. So battling with that mentality, and if you think about it, like when it comes to annotation these days, there's not just the experimental details that you might need to submit. There's the details on, how the instruments that were used, the settings that were on those instruments, and then what you did when you were analyzing the data. So when you add all of those different components up, for someone, like Maria to go and actually reproduce how that data was generated, there's a lot of fields that you could potentially capture. So balancing that, with all those metadata fields that you might need to capture versus making submission processes easy, so you don't put off people from submitting, because not all journals still mandate data submissions. Is a balancing act, and it is something that we do at EBI, and it's and especially when there's new data types that come up, trying to work with the community to see what is it that is feasible for them, and not just in the community, it's the data producers, but as well as the analyzers and the end users as well, because there's so many different types of use cases. And then there's also projects, ELIXIR leads, sort of different implementation projects where you try and get community across Europe, across the world, to try and annotate data that is probably already in a particular repository, or data that's coming into a repository. And there's people out there who are quite excited about annotating data. Kathy can probably say a few things here.
Yeah, maybe I quickly say something as well. Yeah, so in that respect, if we just look at reality, so as a biologist, you're not necessarily trained on how to manage your data, and oftentimes, once it comes to publishing and depositing your data, this is at the end of your PhD, at the end of your contract. You need to wrap up many things. You just need to get this paper out and leave. And then I think this is a bit a problem, because data is not part of that holistic research process. It's just something you need to do at the end. And so I think what we've noticed at ELIXIR is that data management is becoming a much bigger topic. So people now, I think, really understand the importance of managing it properly, of the value that is actually behind that management process as well. And I think, Jessica, you can probably echo that, but I think data management is a word I hear probably 100 times every single day of my working week. So looking into the future, I think we will become much better in doing this, and we'll open up these data to entrepreneurs and to academics a lot better. And faster and more efficient.
So it's an interesting discussion, and I would like to bind this a little bit back to the topic on entrepreneurship, because I hopefully all the entire audience understands how important data is for these entrepreneurs, and it's and data annotation is something, I guess, so take a lot of time. It's very time consuming, and time is something that they don't have. I mean, Maria, you said the lifespan of a startup is 3 to 6 months, so you have to think like
in the early days. Yes, of course, because they started with zero funding, right?
And with entrepreneurs, I mean, in childcare, we say it takes a village to raise a child, and I think the same goes for entrepreneurs or for entrepreneurial ventures. So regularly, you're not left alone. So you see here already, EBI cares about the different use cases that the data is going to be used for. And I would like to give this a little bit to Jason, because Jason knows very well the kind of ecosystem and how do we help these startups regularly, or can they be helped in wrangling with these questions? You mentioned already they have to have an informatics strategy. Well, what happens if I'm a startup with three people, one PhD in biology, one life scientist, some medical doctor maybe, and another one doing, I don't know, sociology? Nobody is an informatics specialist. So what happens then? So are they left alone?
You know, we try not to leave them alone, because that's where things go wrong. I think the most important thing is that at the beginning, you've got to take the time rather than just running. I mean, as scientists, we all think, okay, let me do some experiments and that's the value that I'm bringing. It's more about sitting down, taking a pause, and trying to understand what it is that your business is aiming to do, and what's the expertise that you have at the table, and most importantly, what are the gaps that need filling. So we're not asking for them to develop their informatics strategy in isolation. We're more want to sit down with the companies that come through our accelerator program and say, who are the experts in the field? Who are the collaborators and key opinion leaders that you should be speaking to, consultants in some cases as well, to help you map out that strategy, but know that it is a priority for you to do so. That's the key. There are plenty of people out there who have the expertise to be able to help young entrepreneurs. They don't even have to hire them if they don't have the capital to do so. But there are many people who give their time for free, I'm sure many people on this panel included, to help them think through, at least at a high level to begin with, what their strategy should be, and also having good stewardship. Most of the companies that we're looking at are spinning out of academic labs. They need to be able to have the integrity and the honesty about their own data that they've generated in their hands, as well as the data that they use to come to the conclusions, the diagnostic signatures they develop, the new drug targets that they've identified, whatever it may be. How are they actually going to prove that those insights that I'm now investing in them to further validate in vivo or whatever the system may be are built on a solid foundation? I also wanted to come back to, since these are spin-outs in many cases of academic institutions, I think across the board, whether it be the publication side, the data archives, industry, and academia, we have to agree that enough is enough. We cannot continue to spend, to Maria's point, public funds to generate data where something like 85% of the publications in the general space can't be reproduced. That ends up with companies that are getting funding from investors that ultimately fail because the initial premise of their whole operation was built on a falsehood. So I would love to be able to see more quality management systems and ISO accreditation implemented in early days. I emphasize this for my companies. I remember at Cambridge Epigenetics, the pain it took after years of not having a quality management system in place, of implementing it retroactively. It was a nightmare. Having to go back and say, oh, well, we should have been annotating all of these different bits of metadata and incorporating that to our analysis. And now's the time to make sure that all of your lab notebooks are of a certain standard, that every piece of equipment, every reagent, every experiment done is properly annotated. And then trying to get a largely academic-minded, creative workforce and ratchet them into this more structured way of thinking was really a Herculean task. And good on them for actually rising to that occasion, but it took us months and months, took us about a year just to pivot in that direction. So I always tell young entrepreneurs that they've got to be thinking about quality and data up front. Companies and academia, as well as everybody in our ecosystem, need to be on board of not only encouraging, but mandating that, again, enough is enough. We cannot continue to spend our public funds or even private funds on partnerships and collaborations that is going to generate data that we don't believe in for whatever reason. I know that there's so many biases that come into play from, even if the data is reproducible, let's say in your own hands, it may not be reproducible in someone else's. You're developing a biomarker signature with your own data set. You try to cross-validate with one from another institution, and it doesn't pan out, and you have no idea why. All these things could be largely helped by implementing more structure and more a focus on quality management upfront. And I would also like to say that, to your point, Hannes, one of the challenges we face is that increasingly we have core facilities, that one core facility is generating the data, another core facility is analyzing the data, another group is maybe even coming up with experimental design. And unless they're harmonized and speaking to one another, it's harder to ensure that we are going to solve this problem, whether it be in young entrepreneurial companies or in the academic setting.
Can I make a comment there? I think, but maybe that's where the opportunity is. Okay, I think, yeah, you're right. There should be incentives or rules when a funding body gives money to kind of have the recipient of the fund to publish the data in a specific format or standard, if that standard exists, by the way, and that's still an open question. Okay. Because you can say you have to publish that openly in I don't know how, but you have to publish openly. And then you create an FTP site and you put everything down there. You did what the founder asked you to do, right? But at the same time, it's the same issue we have with kind of fake news and overload of data. Okay, I don't think science is immune to that problem. You will always have people telling their own truth or their own experiments. Nano publication without peer reviews is booming, okay, and that's going to be the way in many ways, okay. So I think the opportunity is in this ocean of data, good or bad, who are going to be the one that know how to pick the valuable, relevant, reliable data and that you can trust, and what system do you put in place to trust it or not, okay. And that's maybe what the opportunity is going to be for startups in the data science, AI, machine learning, all kind of the buzzwords, that I know how to pick out the information and data that is not only relevant, but I can trust is providing you some level of reliability. And that's one of the opportunities there. I mean, adding standards and constraints, yes, but I don't think it will solve the problem. It will minimize it, but not solve it.
Abel, just to build real quickly on what you said, maybe we need a TripAdvisor for data sets, if the one doesn't exist already, where the community, wherever it be the private sector or the public sector, says, you know what, I've analyzed this data, it's well annotated, the metadata makes sense, reproducible, it's high value, it's good quality, and then naturally there will be a market push for everybody to increase the quality of what they're putting out.
But yeah, maybe, but that's the way science works, okay? When someone puts an hypothesis out with a publication, the science community takes some time to build consensus. We've seen that with COVID and what's happening about all the different kind of contradicting kind of the findings or kind of instructions to protect yourself or protect your family or your neighbor. I think that's the way science works, and I think you have an amount of information that's not all is good. And the process of peer review is not just when you publish the article in Cell or Nature. The peer review continues afterwards. As kind of you mentioned, Maria, I don't know the paper you mentioned about Broad, that is probably not reproducible and is not being retracted because it's Broad. It's out there, and the word of mouth is working. People talk, and that paper will be not put in references and put down until kind of is forgotten. So I don't know what the solution is, but I think the constraining and forcing scientists to do something they are not trained to do, okay, because there is training as well there, okay, that needs to be happening, and that takes a long time. Needs to be solved also a posteriori, okay. There's going to be information, there's going to be good and bad. I mean, there's no way that's going to stop. Is how do you find the right one? And again, fake news is one, that is kind of at the moment an issue for everybody in the world, right? So it's not just science.
That's an interesting point. So maybe let me just quickly jump in there. Training scientists. So we scientists, we publish papers, and then so that's what we're measured on. We want to publish papers at high impact papers, and that's it. So everything else is also nice, but that's sadly oftentimes the case. So we have those scientists that were trained in this kind of a system, and now you have to retrain this. Is this the way it's supposed to work, or who does it? Who has to do it? Who is responsible for retraining these scientists to be more of the kind of scientist that you as an entrepreneur need? So Maria, who has trained you? I know that actually we have a very interesting coincidence here. You are all in Cambridge, right? So who from you is actually born in Cambridge? Raise your hand. None of you, right?
You mean companies or if
no,
I
no,
was
no,
born
you personally.
No, I was not born in Cambridge, no.
No, none of you, I guess, right? I'm not sure about Jessica, but I know from the others. So that's completely. So you all came to Cambridge to start companies or to work in science there. So maybe make it really concrete, Maria. What has Cambridge done to you? How have they helped you actually raise this kind of company and help you train in the way that you are now very, very successfully operating as an entrepreneur?
So I don't know if it's around data or around business, because I think the biggest training that I got was more around the business part, right? Cambridge is an excellent ecosystem, and London as well, right? To get, everyone you bounce around is either already a well-established investor or entrepreneur, or it's a wannabe entrepreneur. So then there's a lot of it's a really dynamic ecosystem. So it's very easy to just learn at every opportunity. You go to the pub and you learn and you exchange ideas, and and then there are so many lectures, and then there are so many mentors that are happy to mentor and give back, that have already made it. In general, it's a very friendly ecosystem, across, from the moment you wake up until the moment, you'll go to bed, it's just it's an opportunity around the day to actually, especially if you're looking at it, to be constantly exposed into information around how to become a good entrepreneur, how to build a proper biotech company, how to think about everything, and everything around that. So that's what I can say about Cambridge and my personal experience. And it's the same then in London for us, but we moved to London because we participated, or we got selected by Techstars Accelerator, who is one of the best or arguably maybe the best technology accelerator in the world, right? And then obviously that was 3 months of a really, really hardcore bootcamp, right? And that's how you shape personality, business-wise, I guess. Now, when it comes to the data side, to answer your question about who is responsible for training there, for me, the answer is three stakeholders. Very simple for me, right? The one is the funding bodies. The funding bodies that they issue all of the grants, they need to come together and they need to actually start thinking, when they give money and they fund particular lines of research, right? That will be generating like Jason was saying, you need to have an informatics strategy. Well, these funding bodies, they need to have a data strategy, right? Because at the end of the day, it used to be that we were just funding discoveries. You are not just funding discoveries right now. You are funding actually data that will be supporting those discoveries and are going to be, and those funding bodies have a very clear data funding strategy, right? And that's what they need to shape. So that's number one, right? And if they do that, then everyone that is now going after that money, they will need to adhere. And again, to Abel's point, it cannot be a shallow guideline of make sure you, I don't know, publish your data and you then put it somewhere that's openly accessible, right? It just cannot be just that, right? So they are the first ones. The second ones are the journals, especially the high impact journals, right? They need to become better about very strict processes on how do they review data, how do they make sure that the data quality and descriptions, in the materials and methods about how those data were generated, were analyzed, are reproducible. Like potentially, I don't know, they put something in place about, they ask their reviewers, can you try to maybe, evaluate, what's the quality of this data, or if you can reproduce anything on this data. But definitely the high impact journals, they need to be, they need to be on top of this. And the third stakeholder that needs to take care of this is everyone that manages the databases, right? EBI, Broad, whoever it is, NIH, whoever it is that is managing those databases, right? They need to just be investing more money onto better tools. I mean, Jason alluded to that, right? Like, and trainings, right? Like when we are discussing about, you need to make it easier for the person to input all of the fields that they need to be inputting. Yeah, invest in a better tool, map what that would look like, just like, like what's the point in investing like millions on having these really expensive databases, and then even more millions and having all of these people that annotate the data, and not investing like 1/20th of that money into just getting better tools, right? In general, like in science, and that extends also to those bodies like EBI and all of the big bodies. Like there is this like philosophy of like homemade. Let's homemade something. Let's not homemade something. Just get a data management tool from out there. Pay some money from it, plug it, and then be over with it, right? I mean, there is incredible companies doing a lot of that stuff, and they have thought of all of that, right? That, like even if we spend endless hours on these panels with all of our smart brains compared, like we'll never come up with like, oh, what's the best data management or access control or process thingy. But there are companies that do this for a living. So just invest in those companies, get that software, be over with it, right? So for me, that would be how we could institute a global change there, right? If those three stakeholders change how they do things, because they are the gatekeepers, they control everything, right? Then everyone else will change, right? Because you won't be able to get money if you do not follow what the funding body is telling you. You won't be able to publish if you do not make your data. And it's not just the data, because if Nature issues that as a policy, and when Nature and all of the big journals, not just Nature, are issuing those policies, me coming as a PhD, I don't need to wait until the end of my PhD. Already from day one, I know that if I want to publish into Nature, this is what has to happen. So then I structure my whole experiment according to that. Day one, if I want to get that grant, then I know what I need to adhere to. And similarly, if now the, EBI, whoever, again, I'm using EBI just as an example, but everyone else, if they are changing how people are like accessing the data, processing the data, submitting the data, then already I will know from day one, because I'll be trained. And yes, I do agree, there is going to be a generation or some people that are at the end of something important that, yeah, they will have to live some sleepless nights, but well, I think it's a very small sacrifice to get to instantiate for the benefit, for the return on that investment that we're going to be getting at the end of this, right? That's my point of view.
Right. Thank you, Maria. So I'm looking also a little bit on the time. So first of all, thank you everybody, because I know we were hard cut there. Thank you everybody for joining the panel. I hope it was as fruitful the discussion for you as it felt for me. I think we have a big laundry list for EBI. I'm pretty sure that you provide a lot of these services partly already, but but that is pretty much that something that we can build on. Hopefully not only in panels, as Maria said, but also in actual doing action. There are a lot of actors out there that are going to help you if you want to become an entrepreneur. Some of them are here. So if you are in the kind of domain that we were talking about, you are free. You can reach us to Jason, I guess, at any point in time. You mentioned that before, but also to the others. Thank you very much for joining this morning. I hope you have a wonderful day. That goes out to our speakers as well as our audience. Take care of yourselves. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, thanks.